It occurs to me, looking over what's going on in computer games, that this is something that role-playing games have been dealing with since, well, at least the 90s, but probably 88, 89, post Satanic Panic, but not quite the new decade. Things don't tend to break down quite so easily into nice little 10 to 20 year gaps. The point is, it's been going on for a long time, and the fault lines are very similar. People wanted role-playing games to be taken seriously as an art form. They wanted them to mature, and that led to a kind of schism. Above the surface, visibly, this was probably best represented by White Wolf's games, which, while they were actually fairly conventional games, took a very different approach to how they went about creating the games. They put a lot of emphasis on the narrative element rather than the game element. They called the games master a storyteller. Things like that. They suggested techniques and ideas, and it took people by storm because it was something different and new. But you move on down a few years, and the cracks start to show. There were problems with this approach, just as there were problems with a purely game-oriented approach. If you're a storyteller in a game style, a game genre, a game apparatus that is meant to encourage people to stretch their legs, create their own stories, do their own thing, if you're overriding that with your own story, then you're eliminating a large part of what appeals in these games. For a lot of people, this wasn't necessarily a problem. They went ahead and they did their own thing, and a lot of them got the piss taken out of them for it. The stereotype of the trench coat and katana vampire comes from that. But as long as people were having fun, who the hell really cares? But that's the trouble. Some people did care. They felt like this was debasing the art form or something. And out of that kind of generation of gamers, I think that's where the kind of artistically minded, mature games minded indie gamer appeared in tabletop, just as it has appeared in computer games. And these people were even more obsessed with the idea of telling a story, to the point where a whole game might be geared towards just telling one particular story or evoking one particular experience. And there's nothing wrong with that per se, but to try and pretend that that is ever going to have as broad an appeal, or that it plays to the strengths of the genre, the apparatus, the game type that we've created, to ever think it's going to be as popular is, crazy, for want of a better term. And yet, that's what they want, and there seems to be a lot of resentment that there is resistance to that. So what's ended up happening in tabletop, or what's in the process of happening, I think, is a split into two communities. You have the role-playing game community on the one hand, which still adheres to the idea of putting the game first, and on the other hand you have a kind of nascent, burgeoning story games community. There's a lot of bleed over between the two, but still. And the story games community is concerned with appearances. In a lot of cases, they want the art form to be seen as mature and capable of doing grown-up things, and they want to tackle issues, and they want to tackle the issues head-on. So they make the games about issues rather than having games in which issues may occur. And they're very judgmental, and they look down their nose at everyone else. And in response to this, at least in part, has come up what's called the old school Renaissance movement, and you might see that paralleled, at least somewhat, in computer games, in the kind of retro games and the love of 8-bit art and so on. Both are an attempt to go back to the start and find out, partially through nostalgia and partly for kind of research through play purposes, what it was about these genres and about these games, and about these tools that hooked us in the first place. What was it? Is gameplay more important than graphics in the case of computer games, or is the fact that the rules were largely incomplete and that we had to fill them in ourselves? Was that important? Was that part of the experience with old school tabletop games? And in both cases, the bar has been lowered tremendously on how to get into this. If you want to produce and sell a role-playing game, all you really need to do is type it up and send it out, and people will buy it, and people will read it, and people will play it. And it's not quite as easy with computer games because of the bar level, knowing how to program, how to source graphics and sound and so on, and is higher. But it is much lower than it used to be, especially with distribution resources like Steam and so on. It's not dissimilar to when home computers first became really viable purchases for ordinary people, and you got this huge burst of bedroom programmers, which kind of established certainly the British computer game industry and kept it at the forefront for such a long time. And we've got that similarly in computer games now, in that just about anyone can, with the time, the effort, the will, and a slight bit of skill, can now put one together and get it out there. And even more so with tabletop games. Again, because all you really need to do is to be able to write, put something together, wrangle some desktop publishing software in a halfway competent manner, and you can put something out there. But yes, this is where the split seems to be occurring. The old school movement, or the traditional gaming movement, because it's not just limited to the old school. These are people who put the game experience at the forefront, and the freedom of the player at the forefront. When you create a game of this type, you're not creating a game exactly, you're creating a context, a world, a framework of rules within which people can construct their own experiences. This is something people bang on about a lot when it comes to computer games, but there are very few computer games that really allow you to have a truly free experience. They're very hemmed in compared to role-playing games, and that's why I continue to prefer traditional role-playing games over computer games. And on the other hand, you've got these people who want their games, their material, to be taken seriously, and that's the same problem we see afflicting the Hugo Awards, incidentally. Want to be seen as mature, they want to handle these issues, and they want to tell a story. It necessarily impacts on the interactivity and the freedom, and that's fair enough. But these are two different audiences, and mostly the story games type, the indie games type people want to impose their point of view, their style of game on everyone else. They see it as being inherently better, or at least they see the opposition as being inherently worse somehow childish or immature, that it shouldn't exist for some reason. And that's where you get the problem, that's where you get the clash between the two. It does happen the other way around. There's certainly a lot of resistance to story games from traditional gamers, but a lot of that stems purely from the attitude that they get from the indies. And I see that paralleled in what we've seen going on in computer games. So I think this is probably going to go on for at least 20 years, as it has for us, and probably further. And I think we'll probably end up, in both cases, with getting ruptured communities separated into different camps. In tabletop, that's role-playing gamers and story gamers. In computer games, I don't know exactly how it's going to shake down. It'll probably have a much less hard and fast divide than tabletop games. But that divide, I think, will occur, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with it. And you see the same kind of criticisms. Oh, it's a walking simulator, that sort of thing. And vice versa. Oh, it's another He-Man shooty game. When really, there's enough room for everybody. The problem only occurs when one side looks down and the other attempts to silence or control the other, damns them in public and gives them shit. And that's really the source of the conflict. I don't like it, therefore it shouldn't exist. That's probably the root problem behind a great deal of things in the world, not just games. Anyway, that's just some thoughts before I head off to go and play Iron Kingdoms with my friends. Peace out.